Here we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bourbon of the Week. This is my second YouTube live that we have going on, and I am joined with Logan and Mac from Basement Rickhouse. If you're not already following them, I have the socials in the corner down there. Instagram, Basement Rickhouse, TikTok, Basement Rickhouse, and I believe it's thebasementrickhouse.com, correct, for the merch and
That's
everything
right.
else as far as the website?
Yep.
So that's what they have going on over there as far as their social medias. Make sure you follow them there. I'm going to show you one quick TikTok, which was a recent TikTok from them of their bar setup, because you're going to want to check this out. So look at this here real quick.
I want to see your bars. I want to see how your bourbon's displayed. I need ideas.
Okay, let's go to the basement. Here we go. There's all of this. Ta-da. So we have the Rick House and the basement bar. We've got the vintage whiskey ads. We've got the bottles we refuse to inventory. Don't ask how many, we don't count. We've got our custom light fixture. And 14 of the best air fresheners money can buy.
So there you have it. That's their bar that they're sitting in right down there. They ended it with the 14 best air fresheners that money can buy. And as you can see, what is that? 8 of them right there behind you.
That's right. That's right.
So if you guys don't mind, take the time real quick, introduce yourselves, who you are, your experience, and what you want to say about yourselves.
Go first.
All right. So, hi, my name is Mac. I am half of the Basement Rick House, and I pretty much have followed along over the last couple of years as Logan went down this rabbit hole of bourbon. I got to tag along and listen and learn and try a bunch of different things out. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. And been here to kind of help build everything that you see behind us and continuing to kind of go forward and shed some light on other women who are in this industry and doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah. And my name's Logan. I'm the other half of Basement_Rickhouse. We've been involved in bourbon now for probably a decade. You know, we live in Central Kentucky, and you've got two options. You can either be into horses or you can be into bourbon. And our HOA wouldn't allow for horses. So we decided on bourbon. So I fell in love with it, fell in love with the product, but more importantly, I fell in love with the people and the process and just the passion behind it. And we're not too far from Buffalo Trace. I went to go volunteer. I said, you know what, I'll come give tours a couple times a month. They're like, oh no, we'll pay you. I'm like, even better. So started working for Buffalo Trace, which allowed me the opportunity to try out for the tasting panel. And so I served on the tasting panel, worked for Buffalo Trace for almost 6 years, loved every second of it, and now have brought that fun and excitement to the Basement Rickhouse and now to Bourbon of the Week.
Absolutely awesome. And I think the one thing that there's a lot of people obviously in the bourbon industry, it's blown up very quickly over the last couple of years, but something that the two of you bring to it that not everybody has is that knowledge of not only the history, but the in-depth distilleries, how everything's intertwined. That's kind of stuff that I like to learn about all the time. It's one thing to go out and taste all these different bourbons and, hey, I like this one and I like that one, but we're not all going to have the same tasting preferences and everything like that. But at the end of the day, like you said, you love the people, I love the history, and obviously you guys do as well. So I think that really brings it together as far as everything like that goes, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the channel, kind of go over the history. I do something called the Bourbon Bomb of the Week. So once a week, I like to give little hints and tricks into different parts of either the distillery or some verbiage that goes on the bottle. Because I only got started about 1.5 years ago. So 10 years versus 1.5 years, it's definitely a different world that we see and perceive in the bourbon world. But
Sure.
Getting started, I know you
Time to get
mentioned.
into it.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. It's kind of crazy. I got the start from my stepfather. He was drinking bourbon, kind of wanted to impress him with my now wife. So, you know, I sipped on this, I sipped on that, told him I loved it. And then I actually ended up falling in love with it. So now here we are with 75 bottles later behind me on the shelf. So
It's a slippery slope.
Sounds
it
like a
is
similar story.
Yeah,
an expensive, slippery slope.
that's right.
But I guess where I want to start, you mentioned you had the 6 years on the Buffalo Trace tasting panel. Now, one of the things that I've done on my channel here, I went out and I bought this bourbon nosing kit. And that's what I have here.
Yeah.
I got this off of Etsy. It's a great little tool. It's got a bunch of different flavors in here: cherry, oak, wheat, corn, brown sugar, caramel, pretty much everything that you can imagine in your typical bourbon. Is that what somebody who is new to bourbon should be doing to get into the actual past the drinking stage of things and into the tasting, nosing, profiling, and everything like that?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that you'll want to do. Your nose can tell you a whole lot, especially if you're brand new to bourbon. The ethanol scares a whole lot of people away, and so when you first get into it, your nose really is your best friend, because it can tell you some of those flavors. If you're nosing properly, it can tell you some of those flavors to look for when it comes to actually drinking your bourbon. And nosing is one of those things that so many people get wrong, honestly. They'll stick their nose in their glass and they'll just go like that and take a big, deep breath through their nose. And the problem with that is you're just breathing in that ethanol. So the way you actually want to know something is by sticking your nose down in your glass. Glencairn is usually better, or tulip glass is better for, yep, exactly, for that nosing. But you'll stick your nose down in your glass and you actually open your mouth and breathe in through your mouth. You don't even breathe in through your nose. And what that does, that allows you to kind of prep your palate when it comes to experiencing those flavors. Again, it tells your palate these are the things you want to look for. When you do that, you can actually taste it before you taste it. And so by doing things like the sniffers, that's one of the great tools to kind of be able to determine some of those flavors. Another is you really got to put yourself to the test. And a good test is what's called a triangle test, where you'll have three glasses. Two of the three are the exact same product from the exact same bottle. The third glass could be the same product, but with like a splash of something else in it. Have somebody else set that up for you and then actually taste it and see if you can pick out which one is the different one. And that's a good way to, again, make sure you're not just looking for the ethanol, whether or not you like the ethanol or the amount of ethanol. It's you're searching for those flavors.
Now, I like that triangle test. Now, as far as a splash of something else, you talking a splash of water, splash of Coke, splash of ginger ale? What is the splash that you're looking for?
You know what? If you're just getting into bourbon, you mix it however you want to mix it. If your goal is tasting and pulling out specifically the bourbon, then I would recommend just a splash of water. On the tasting panel, we would do almost 20% water, so the water is has some significance to it, and that really does open up the flavors. If you follow us on TikTok, I did a video on that of just the science behind it. And there's some extreme benefits of adding that water to it, especially again if you're new to alcohol.
Yeah, so 20% is actually a crazy number. You see these people, they're like, "Yo, put a drop, 2 drops in it," but to know that somebody who's Buffalo Trace tasting panel is putting 20% in to get those flavor profiles out there is definitely a crazy number that I wouldn't have known about. And I like that test,
Right.
the try it out, the three different things. Now, next, as far as flavor profiles go, again, now when we're talking about, all the different bottles across the Buffalo Trace industry that everybody wants to get their hands on, they talk about different warehouses and different aging processes and everything like that. You hear about warehouse F or X or Y or Z or whatever it may be. Does that really, should I be out there searching for every EH Taylor that comes out of every different warehouse, or are they really going to be the same thing, just a different bottle?
So here's the thing about it with a specific brand like Blanton's, right? Blanton's it comes from warehouse H, but then it'll tell you what rick it comes from, what barrel number it comes from. It gives you that information. And a lot of other bourbons are now doing the same thing. And the key thing is with your bigger distilleries, consistency is key. Now you'll find some Blantons out there. There's some differentiation between them, and you can pick up on different notes. But really, the goal and the job of the tasting panel is to make sure consistency is there. Where if somebody grabs a bottle of Blanton's or EH Taylor or whatever that product is, they can pick it up and go, "Yep, I like that one." Pick up the next one. "Yep, I like that one." We did a experiment one time. Blanton's came out in 1984. And if you've ever been to Buffalo Trace, you've seen the vault that's at Buffalo Trace. If not, you've probably seen pictures of it online. The goal is to have one of every product that Buffalo Trace has produced in this vault. And we actually went in on the tasting panel. We grabbed a 1984 bottle of Blanton's.
Now this was approved.
Yes, that we
This
didn't.
wasn't approved.
This wasn't a Pappy Gate.
This wasn't
heist
this wasn't in the
Netflix
heist.
stuff.
Okay, just
This was
checking.
not. This was not. That's right. So we grabbed a 1984 one and we compared it to today's, and we did a triangle test. And most people, the majority on the tasting panel that are trained to pick out differences, couldn't tell a difference. So that's from 1984 to 2000. That was 2018, 2019 that we did that. And so the goal is consistency. Now, that being said, the aging process is the most important part of bourbon. Not just how long it's aged, which is important, but where in the warehouse it's aged. Because so many people like to say, well, you know what? Ancient age is just poor man's Blanton's, or Weller is poor man's Pappy. That's not the case. Like it's really cool. Yes, those are the same recipes. Ancient age, Blanton's, Rock Hill Farms, Hancock, that's the same recipe. Weller, Pappy Van Winkle, that's the same recipe. But the key thing is the aging is different. The way it works, it's very similar to your house at home. You know, in the summertime, if you were to put a hot rag in your attic, put a hot rag in your basement, both of those are wet. Which one's going to dry first? One in the attic, right?
Right.
Same thing with a wet barrel of bourbon. When you go to a distillery that's got multiple floors, the top floor in the summertime, it can be 130, 135 degrees up there. Whereas on the bottom floor, if they've got a dirt floor, old school warehouse, it's 70, 75 degrees in there. It feels like the air conditioner's on. And what happens is that top floor of that warehouse, that bourbon expands into that barrel more, takes on more of those flavors, taste, and colors more aggressively up at the top than it does at the bottom. And so things like a Van Winkle 12-year and a Weller 12-year, same exact recipe, same exact distillery, and in some cases the same exact warehouse, but different locations in that warehouse. Van Winkle's lower, Weller's higher, and so you get different flavors. A lot of people say, well, the good stuff must come from the top. Good is relative, right? That's the key thing to remember with any review that you watch, that you give. Somebody that says this is great, somebody else is going to pick up and go, this tastes like garbage, right? And you know what? For their palate, they're both right. But typically, your large batch bourbons, your ancient age, your benchmark, that typically comes from the top floors of the warehouse because you're able to stick a bottle or stick a barrel up there. It ages fast, and after a few short years, you can dump it into a bottle, and it has some of the characteristics of an older bourbon. It's got some age, it's got some darkness, all of that. Whereas on the bottom floor, it's much slower. I compare it to barbecue, right? Low and slow a lot of times wins, right? So same way with your bourbon. Your bottom floor is where your very small batch and your single barrels are going to come. So aging is incredibly, incredibly important. People put so much stock into the recipe, saying that this is the end all be all for what the flavor of your bourbon is going to be like. And the recipe is important, but your recipe only accounts for about 30% of the flavor of your whiskey that you're tasting. Every bit of the rest of that comes from the barrel and how it's aged, where it's aged, how long it's aged.
Sticking with that same concept, barrel char has always been something that's been, I guess, one thing I haven't really dove into too much. I've gotten to mash bill, I've got into aging, I understand the concept, the science behind it. As far as barrel char, is a number 1 versus a number 4, 7 seconds versus 20 seconds, is it really that much of a difference that I'm going to see, or what is it doing exactly? Is it giving me more sweeter notes when it's more charred versus not charred? What's going on there?
Yeah, it is. So when you look historically, you know, you've heard of toasted, right? Toasted barrels.
Yep.
Toasted is what you did for Scotch, right? And it wasn't necessarily to alter the flavor. You know, wood, when you cut it down, there's sap in it. It's got some moisture to it. So when you build a barrel, it's possible for that wood to dry out and leak whatever's in it. Whereas when you toast it, when you heat it up, you know, that dries some of that natural moisture that's inside of that wood, dries it out to where when you put alcohol back in it, when you put new distillate back in it, it swells that wood up and prevents it from leaking, right? That was the whole goal originally.
Okay.
For toasted. And then, you know, there's a ton of legends out there about why the first barrel got charred. when you go to some distilleries, they'll tell you that it was because Elijah Craig's barn caught on fire, got struck by lightning, charred all the barrels. It's a really cool story, but if you think about it, if a barn's going to get struck by lightning and catch on fire, what's it going to char? The inside or the outside?
Not the inside.
Right. So it's going to char the outside. Awesome, awesome story. Not knocking it. Fantastic. The other notion is when you look at historically the barrels of bourbon, barrels in the old days were like the Tupperware boxes or the cardboard boxes of today, right? They would reuse them till they fell apart. So same way with barrels back then. So they would have fish guts in it, fertilizer, manure, gunpowder, pickles, you name it, it could have been inside of that barrel. And so their thought process originally was, hey, we're putting alcohol in it, so it's going to clean it. Same thing we clean gunshot wounds and anything else with, so we're going to be fine, right? And so they realized that that pickle and that manure and that fish still came across in their whiskey. So the best way to clean something, sanitation wise, catch it on fire, right? And so that's why they first started charring the inside of those barrels. And when they did, they noticed that sweetness came through, caramels, vanillas, butterscotch. All of that was showing up in the whiskey, as well as the change of color, it's much darker. And so, yeah, the charring does affect it. So when you char a barrel, level 4 char is kind of the most common in the industry, which means that barrel's going to be on fire for about 55 seconds. Let me grab one.
Each level is a different amount of time, and it has a different look, and it is pulling out more and more of the different flavors. So the 4, what you're going to see here in a second, that is the most common.
Yeah, so if you can see this is a level 4. This is what they call the alligator texture, where you can actually see that kind of alligator texture. So that's 55 seconds. Now you do have distilleries now that are doing some differences, and distilleries in the past have done different stuff. Like Rabbit Hole right now, they're doing a little bit less. They're doing a level 3. Watershed, they're doing a level 5 on some stuff. So typically when you char a barrel, inside of that wood you have what's called triloses, and that's inside of the sap. Triloses is what gives vanilla bean the flavor of vanilla. And so when someone does a review of a bourbon and they say this tastes like vanilla and caramel, good.
You're right.
You just
You
described
got
bourbon,
it.
right? Yeah, and that's intentional, right? That's the goal of bourbon. And that caramel and that vanilla comes from that triloses that's inside of the barrel. The more triloses shows up, the longer you char it. Buffalo Trace did an experiment one time as part of the Single Oak Project and some experimental bottles. It was actually a level 9 char. It wasn't actually even released when we did it, but it was on fire for 3.5 minutes. And so, I mean, there wasn't much left of that.
I was gonna say, is there even barrel left at that point?
There's a little bit, not much. So, but yeah, I mean, that charring significantly affects it. It's not always a straight cut answer, because sometimes the lesser charred, you can get some sweetness out of there. And your lesser char is when your recipe is going to come through more. Your higher char is where that flavor of the barrel is going to come through more.
Gotcha. Now, Dave A here in chat asks, and I think I heard something about this. What's the newest brand in the Buffalo Trace line? Is there are they releasing any other bottles coming out recently that you've been aware of?
Yeah, so they're acquiring stuff all the time. The one that you're seeing on the well, you're not seeing on the shelf because everybody's grabbing it, is the old Charter. So you've seen that, and they've acquired some smaller brands but as far as distillate that has been made at Buffalo Trace and that you're seeing on the shelf, that's the newest one. Some other stuff that's coming out isn't stuff that they've made yet, but they will.
Gotcha. And to keep on my last question with the Buffalo Trace thing going on here, and a lot of people obviously ask it, so I have to be pressed to ask you, supply versus demand as far as Buffalo Trace. Now, Buffalo Trace is obviously a huge company. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how to market, they know how to make sure that people want their product, and they know how to put out a great product that people are going to want to keep in demand. Right. They're huge. Do they not have the product to keep up with the current boom that's going on in the bourbon community, or is it a smart marketing technique to release 5,000 bottles at once across the United States?
Yeah, so that's the big misconception, right? Is Buffalo Trace is fueling the secondary market, or insert whatever distillery. Four Roses with their limited release is fueling the secondary market. It's not the case, right? What it is, there's just not enough supply for the demand. When you look historically at whiskey and just alcohol sales in general, in the early teens, 19 teens, whiskey was king. Then you went through Prohibition. Whiskey was still king even through Prohibition, right? That's how NASCAR got created, was whiskey runners, right? And then after Prohibition, 1933 into the 40s, even into the 50s, whiskey was still right up there. When you look at the historic sailor kissing the dental assistant right after World War II, right? Everybody has seen that iconic picture of him holding her in her arms. When you look in the background, there's a Four Roses advertisement right there. And so whiskey was king then. But then you started seeing, the baby boomer generation come into being able to drink alcohol. And what they did, they said, well, I don't want to drink what my parents drink. And so they started doing the mixers, the clear stuffs, the gins, the vodkas. And then it transitioned into beer. Some of the Budweiser and Bud Light and Miller Lite. You saw that in the early '90s. And so this bourbon boom is new even to the past 6 to 7 years of what it is now. When I first got started at Buffalo Trace on a Sunday afternoon, nice weather outside, we wouldn't have anybody show up. And Freddie Johnson and I would be sitting there just talking, and I would sit there listening to him tell stories. Right now, when you go there, you're waiting in line at 11:30 for an hour and a half, right, just to be
Yep.
able to get in the door. And so that demand has gone up. And so a lot of people will say, all right, well, they're not producing enough. Buffalo Trace, same with all other distilleries. You look at Bardstown, you look at Heaven Hill, you look at all of these distilleries are expanding. Buffalo Trace right now is on the back end of a 1.2 billion with a B dollar expansion. They're literally doubling the size of the distillery. They're adding another still. They've added 12 more fermenters, which they had 12 96,000 gallon fermenters. They just added 12 more 96,000 gallon fermenters. They're building a new warehouse about every 3.5, 4 months. And so people say, all right, we'll just release more. Hard to make a 23-year-old bourbon overnight, right?
Right.
And so you have to sit there and you have to wait on it. So when you look at the age that people are wanting, that 8 to 10 year to 20 to 23 year stuff, you have to go back in time to when that would have been distilled. What did the industry look like then? Well, it wasn't what it is today, right? And so the answer could be, hey, I'm going to come out with 10 new bottom shelf products that are 2 years old and been stuck in the top floor of the warehouse, and it's going to be a great mixer, but we're getting product out there. It's demand is driving it, and it's not the export market. Exports really haven't increased, substantially. Its demand here is absolutely insane.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have me and my buddies were actually trying to book a tour at Buffalo Trace. I think like 3 months out they were trying to go, and not even one spot open for the weekend they wanted. So it's definitely the demand has been. I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't for the past year and a half. So I can only imagine the people that who else has gotten involved in it. But I want to move over to you, Mac, real quick. I had a question on my Instagram earlier about women in whiskey, and where's that going? How is that currently right now? I know a few women in whiskey. I got my wife into bourbon when I first started. We're obviously expecting our first daughter, so not drinking it anymore. But at the time, she was trying to get there and definitely didn't know where to start as far as women in whiskey go. So I want to ask you about that. I know you do a lot on the TikTok as far as women in whiskey.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. I appreciate that, and I'm glad that your fans are curious because what I'm seeing is happening. It's a lot like when women were going into the gym, right? And all these like big dudes were getting all offended because the women wanted to bar their weights and do all this stuff, and they were getting really freaked out, right? Like we saw it experiencing, and then like, okay, well, we're gonna pinkify that. Here's the girly side to go. Here's this softer side to go. Here's all these classes. Here's these little things for you. And that was what was really happening about the time that the bourbon boom was kind of getting started up again. And luckily, there was enough women who had been in the industry were raised in the industry, have family that was, master distillers who was like, no, I don't want that little gentle thing over there. I know how to drink my whiskey. I know what I like in my whiskey. And so, luckily, about 10 years ago, is when you started seeing some different bourbon women groups popping up. And so, one of them that I'm a member of is the Bourbon Women Association, which is kind of headquartered in Louisville, but now they have branches all across the United States. It was started by Peggy No Stevens. So, you hear that name, No, right? So,
Yep.
she is the No family. And so she was the first female master taster. So she knows her stuff. And so she was one of the first women voices that were stepping up saying, no, we know what we're talking about. We know what we like. And stop trying to kind of put us over on the side and give us pink bottles and all these mixers. And so she was a really big part of kind of stepping forward and making some space in the industry for women. And so she was really instrumental about reaching out into the industry and finding other women who were ready to stand up and say, yes, this is something that I want to do, something I'm passionate about. And then when I started getting more involved in it, we moved to Central Kentucky. We started, as most people do. Well, yeah, I think most people do. We started drinking and we were mixing it because that's what we had thought to do. That's what we were told to do. And then gradually we stopped mixing it with Coke and ginger ale and things like that and started doing more of those tastings. And as we did, I got to, start reaching out more into the industry. We're here in Central Kentucky. And so one of the really exciting things was right down the street from us, the first female master distiller got put in charge of Castle and Key. And so if anybody knows that one, if you know Buffalo Trace, you know E.H. Taylor, E.H. Taylor left there, went and started the Old Taylor Distillery, which became Castle and Key in 2015. And that's when Marianne Eaves was the first female master distiller. Luckily, in the past 7 years, that number has grown exponentially. There was one, and now there's many. And so that's really exciting. So Marianne Eaves is probably the first one who was getting her name out there. She was the first one with the title. And then after that, we started going pretty quickly. There's some women-owned distilleries. Jet the Creed is one right up the street from us as well. Female-owned, female-run. They're the ones coming up with their flavors. They're the ones that are putting the product out. They've got some clear stuff and they've got some whiskeys. And then it's continued to expand out. I think we kind of started as a hub here in Central Kentucky and it kept going out and out from there. And so we've got some other really big names happening. So Alex Castle, who's the master distiller at a distillery down in Memphis, the Old Dominic. Anybody has heard of that one or tried that one now? She is from Kentucky, born and raised. She got her start with Alltech. She was the one that started up the distillery for Alltech. Then she also worked over at Wild Turkey. At the age of 24, she was the distillery supervisor. So she was there working with the Russells. She was there figuring all that stuff before Eddie Russell became the co-master distiller. So she got some really good experiences there with Jimmy. And then she was like, you know what? I'm ready to do my own. And so she got to go down there to Memphis and do that. And then right now, one of the really big names that I'm enjoying following right now is Fawn Weaver and everything she's doing at Uncle Nearest. She has really done a great job going out there and saying, I'm unapologetically a woman and I'm unapologetically so proud of this distillery and unearthing our story here. So really enjoying that and her story. And then Jackie Zykan up at Old Forester. So she is doing some really cool things, bringing some stuff to market that is different that we haven't really seen kind of those flavors before. So yeah, those are just honestly like here in this little part. But the Bourbon Women Association, like I said, they are highlighting women across the country involved in this industry, and I would highly recommend following them, learning more.
And scientifically, women have better palates than men. I mean, it's been proven, right, that women's palates are more sensitive to specific notes that you find more in whiskey. So on the tasting panel, it was probably 50 to 60% were women on the tasting panel of the 20 to 25 of us.
Yep. And so some of the different flavors. So we're biologically, scientifically, whatever you want to call it, more aware of those spicy flavors as well as some of those bitter flavors. because those were things that scientifically needed to be protective. Those were some flavors that could have been dangerous to ingest. And so those are some things that are different. Our palates just pick up a little bit more, which is I think one of the reasons why those kind of more mossy peat flavors just kind of really set me off, and I can't enjoy those bourbons as much because those flavors are so strong on my palate.
Well, let me just say you are one of the more passionate women that I have personally heard speak about this, so it's awesome to have you here on that. We have a few women here in the chat already saying, great question, love the history, love everything you have about it. So you mentioned the One Society. Where can they go to either follow along or get involved or anything like that?
Yeah, bourbonwomen.org. You can check that out. I have a video on our TikTok and our Instagram now, right? And then I think we could probably get a link in our bio on our Instagram pretty quick to that. I mean, in addition to the educational pieces of it, and the networking pieces. So they have their event coming up in Louisville at the end of August, and they sold out within like 2 days of their
That's awesome.
big conference. Yeah. But they do events throughout the country. They do virtual and in-person events. And one of the other pieces that I like now is that they are getting their single barrel pick program going. And so they just did their first pick of New Riff, which I fangirl New Riff. I love how they can do it. Oh, are you gonna reach for one?
I got a couple of them. The
Yes.
single barrel, the small batch, or the bottled and bond. They're both fantastic bottles.
Yes. So their single barrel program. So we were talking about Blanton's earlier and how they had a Blanton's from 1984 that tastes the exact same as the one that they just made or they just were bottling in 2019. And that's consistency is important there. New Riff, they love that it is consistently inconsistent, right? Those barrels are different. And so the pick that I got for the Bourbon Women's Society, it had like a smoked meat flavor, which was really interesting. Like I want to have that with like a cigar and brisket, and just like that would be a really great combo. And then I just opened this one that Logan brought home for me from a trip, and it's like coffee and chocolate, and both are great, and both I'm gonna have with different additions, and that's one of the things I love there about that.
Yeah, a lot of distilleries will embrace that variance, which is cool, right? It's like some of the old Cracker Jack. If any of you are older and remember Cracker Jack boxes, where you buy something you weren't completely sure what you had inside, what toy was inside. Same way with a lot of bourbon distilleries. They love that.
Absolutely. Now, keeping with those newer distilleries and everything like that, getting away from your professional and more into your opinion side of things, other than New Riff, which we just spoke about, what are some new up-and-coming distilleries that so I walk into a liquor store, you walk into PA Fine Wine and Good Spirits, there's 300 bottles of bourbon on the wall. What should I be looking for as somebody who's new to the bourbon industry? You see small batch, you see single barrel, you see aged 10 years, you see bottled and bond. How can I distinguish what I should be spending 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 on my first time into the liquor store, maybe trying to buy a new bottle of bourbon?
Look down a little bit more. It's your first time I know it's
down in that middle. Yes.
Right. Well, and honestly, if you're new to bourbon, I'm not sending you to a liquor store anyway. I'm sending you to a bar.
Okay.
And I'm asking you to have that bartender set you up a blind tasting. Tell the bartender, hey, I'm going to give you $45, $50. Give me a range of bourbons, and keep track of them. I'll give you a good tip at the end, I promise. And set me up a blind tasting and let me figure out what I like. Have them pour it neat, and then add you some water in there to help open it up if you're new, and do it that way. And then you have a list of, what, I really like this, and then next time you do that, whatever was your number one, say, bartender, I want you to pour this one that I really liked last time, and then pour 3 different ones, and just keep that process going. And then you know what to go to the liquor store and actually buy. So that's as a new person. Now, one of the things that I do, especially if it's not something that I've heard of or not something that I recognize, I look at that bottled and bond, right? That's a good kind of benchmark to say, because the thing about bourbon, legally it's the ABCs, right? Alcohol, it's got to be a certain proof, got to come off the still at a certain proof, got to go into a barrel at a certain proof. It's got to be made in America, not Kentucky. It's got to be made in America.
Everybody hear that? Everybody heard that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Everyone just stopped following you too.
That's
Right,
right.
everybody just left.
Additive, you can't have any additives inside of your bourbon, which there's some misconceptions about that. They say, well, what about wild turkey honey? It's a different story. But the age thing, right? There's no age requirement for bourbon. You can literally have a drop of bourbon inside of a barrel, poured out 5 seconds later, right? But for straight bourbon, there's a 2-year age statement. Okay. Now, anything less than 4 years, if it's a straight bourbon, it could be Kentucky straight bourbon, Tennessee straight bourbon, Pennsylvania straight bourbon, whatever the case may be. If it's a straight bourbon, has to be 2 years. Anything less than 4 years, you have to have an age statement on the outside of that bottle. So you actually have to say this is a 2-year or a 3-year bourbon. Now, some distilleries will get a little crafty in that, and they'll say things like, this is an 8-seasoned bourbon. 8 seasons, unless you're from Texas, is 2 years, right? So that's your age requirement. So then you get into the barrel. It's got to be a brand new charred white oak. C, corn, got to be 51%. So really, you're confined to those rules and regulations when it comes to bourbon. And so you've got new distilleries popping up that are going, all right, well, how do I be different? How do I break the mold a little bit? And so you're seeing some different things pop up. So when you look at new distilleries, like one cool one that I really like is Starlight. I live in Kentucky. We live in Kentucky and love Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. This is from Indiana. And so my Kentucky friends may hate me just a little bit, but what they're doing different is everybody's heard of like farm to table when it comes to food, right? A lot of distilleries are trying this farm to glass model. They're literally keeping the bees. They have beekeepers that come to their distillery where they also grow the corn, they grow the rye, they grow, all these different grains, and then they grow the stuff that they want to finish things in. And so they'll grow cherries, they'll grow the peaches to do different finishes. And so every element that they've got, they're keeping on this farm down to the bees and specific bees in specific locations that will pollinate different grains and different things in very specific ways. And so stuff like that. Listen, Buffalo Trace bought a farm. They've grown some corn. They tried this farm to glass model. It's got nothing on what some distilleries like Starlight are doing, because not only is it something different, a lot of them have to, because your big corn producers, your big grain producers are selling to the Buffalo Traces, to the Wild Turkeys, to the Four Roses, to the Heaven Hills. And so they're having to be creative in how they source. And a lot of them are buying land and doing it themselves.
Gotcha. And yeah, it's kind of crazy what these smaller distilleries have to do to kind of get their foot in the door with the market being the way that it is. And I'm happy to see a lot of them open up. And kind of just a couple last questions for you. First and foremost, we talked about the secondary industry a little bit earlier. What's your thoughts on, one, how that got to be the way that it is today? And two, is it okay? Is it making the bourbon industry better because things are going on secondary market for $300, $400 when Pappy themselves is releasing it for $150 or $200 or whatever it may be? Or is it something that's kind of killing the market for somebody like myself or some of my followers who are out there really trying to win Pennsylvania state lotteries just to get their hands on a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle at MSRP?
Yeah. So let me preface this by saying I haven't paid secondary for a bottle of bourbon. I haven't stood in line. I haven't camped out for a bottle of bourbon. But that also doesn't mean that I've got hookups either. Literally, the collection you see behind us has been, I'm 9:30 on a Tuesday night going to the grocery store to buy diapers and walking in the liquor store next door and going, well, that's something you don't see every day, right? And buying it. So it's been sheer luck. I used to travel the country a lot, walked in liquor stores, and would get lucky. So I can't say that I've ever supported the secondary market financially. But that being said, it would be really dangerous to limit it also. People again say that distilleries are driving the secondary market. It's not true. I don't work for a distillery. I'm not sponsored by a distillery. No distillery sends me a paycheck or a free bottle of bourbon, right? So no distillery is paying me to say this. But that being said, distilleries aren't causing the secondary market to be what it is? Demand. It's economics 101. You've got a limited supply, you've got a crazy amount of demand, right? What's that do to the cost? It raises it, right? So it's economics 101. The stuff that is more rare, that has more limited supply, the demand naturally goes up. We saw this with toilet paper with COVID, right? No different. So same way with bourbon, but it's one of those things that people love their bourbon. They love collecting it, even if they don't drink it. You know, they'll have bottles that they never ever plan on opening, and that's fine, right? But it's driving the secondary. It's not the distilleries driving it.
Gotcha. And last but certainly not least, I want to know from both of you on this, your current favorite bottle that you have in your collection behind you, because it is a beautiful collection and you definitely have some bottles that not everybody can say that they have. And then also your current favorite bottle that maybe everybody can get their hands on, something that somebody, an average person like myself, can walk into a liquor store, find. Maybe they're overlooking it. Maybe it doesn't have enough recognition right now, that you guys could recommend just off personal opinion here.
So my all-time favorite is not Pappy Van Winkle 23 or 25 or 20 year. It's not OFC 1991. It's something that 3 years ago you could walk into a liquor store and see it sitting on a shelf with dust on it because no one knew what it was. And it's Rock Hill Farms. So there it is right there. So Rock Hill Farms. Made Buffalo Trace, mash bill number 2, same mash bill as Blanton's, Elmer T. Lee, some of those, but aged quite a bit differently, lower, slower, a little bit longer than those. So that's my all-time absolute favorite, and I have that much left, so I'm milking it like crazy.
Gotta hold on to it.
Yep. So that's my number one.
Yeah, and if any of you all can find that on the shelves and you want to let us know, that'd be great. His birthday is coming up,
That's right.
and I haven't got him anything yet. So if y'all want to help me out, that'd be awesome. Man,
Your favorite and you're easily able to find are honestly the same thing, which is cool. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how bourbon works. Just because it's hard to find doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a better bourbon.
Yep.
I agree with you.
So I'm gonna go back to that new riff. Okay. So again, this new riff single barrel process is everything's different. My first single barrel pick that I got was from a liquor store in far western Kentucky. Loved it. Like caramel, chocolate, coffee, yum. Then I went and walked into Kroger when we got back home. I was like, they have that here. Different flavor profile, different proof, all of that kind of stuff. My next favorite, we got a single barrel from what was it? Atlas and Mason. So one of the friends we made out in LA. He's out in LA now. But he did a really great pick that I loved. And so this is kind of like my thing, you know, it's my Pokemon Go, it's my whatever we do as adults, right? So I'm just collecting the different picks that people do and trying to find another profile like what I so pretty easy to find. You can pretty much go anywhere. If it's got this side tag, that probably tells you that it's a pick. No matter what on the front, it's going to tell you that proof. The ones I've found are around like the 110 to 112 proof are the ones I've enjoyed the most. So that's what I would kind of suggest you looking for if you want to find something like that. Yes, I'm a woman and I like higher proof bourbons.
Love it.
Thing. Yes.
And just so you don't think that I'm just a Buffalo Trace fanboy, Rock Hill Farms is my all-time favorite go-to. But my daily, and it's becoming harder to find, is the Henry McKenna 10-year bottled and bond. I think it's just a well-balanced. It's a 10-year-old. It's one of those lower and slower. It's got the good amount of spice, which I like. It's got, the good sweet notes. So it's just a well-balanced bourbon. Some of you watching this, either on TikTok or on YouTube, may go, gosh, I hate that. That's fine. You're right? For your palate, you're right. Again, palates are so subjective. And where that's even become allocated a kind of sub $25 bottle that is absolutely fantastic is the Early Times bottled and bond as well. So another really good one there. In Kentucky, they've even allocated that in the past couple of weeks. So I need to stop telling people what I drink.
They have definitely been taking a lot of these bottles that seem to be at one point, like you said, dusty on the shelf, and now they're
Yep.
almost even Old Granddad here, which is what my stepfather drinks, gone. Can't find it on the shelf. Won an award a couple of months ago. Now you can't even get it. We got to travel across state lines and everything like that.
Right.
Lyle, by the way, in chat here says comparing bourbon to toilet paper isn't something I hear on any other channel, and I would agree with you. The fact that we have made that comparison, but you were right, 100%. The supply and the demand that goes along with that. So, but
Well,
that's all.
and just one other thing on that, just the hype train, right? People will say, I've got to find Blanton's because people say it's the best bourbon in the world, and you can't find it, or Pappy Van Winkle, or whatever bourbon that used to be dusty and is no longer dusty. The hype train dies in the blind tasting. So if you want to figure out what bourbon is actually good, set it up in a blind. And reviews are awesome. You know, I love your reviews because you always preface it as, this is what I think. This is my opinion, right? So many people that do reviews go, listen, this is the way it is. And if you don't believe me, if you don't agree with me, you're wrong. And I compare it to colorblind people, right? When you look at somebody that's colorblind, usually it's not black and white, right? Usually it's just a range of colors that they're missing. You have a colorblind person that really sees blue really, really well. And they go, my favorite color is blue. That's what I look for when I'm looking at a piece of art. Where somebody that sees a full spectrum goes, my favorite color is red. I absolutely love red. And if you don't like red, then you're wrong. Well, same way with a palate, right? Somebody that's very sensitive to caramel notes can say, I look for caramel in a bourbon. Somebody else that can't taste the caramel notes goes, yeah, I don't like the spice of this bourbon. And so people are blind to certain flavors when it comes to bourbon. And so take reviews with a grain of salt. You know, if you want to find somebody that does really good reviews, find somebody that you've done blind tastings with. You find somebody that does a review that says, yep, this is really good, and you agree, right? Based off of a blind. Don't just say, hey, you know what? X bourbon review said that this was good and this one was garbage. And so therefore it must be true. Everybody's palate's different. And so I just want to thank you for how you do reviews and that you say, this is what I think. And if you don't agree with me, that's okay too.
Right. Absolutely. And again, that's the one thing that I think there's so many people out there with this bourbon industry blowing up that everybody wants to get involved somehow. And it's honestly one of the reasons between that and COVID, I had nothing to do when I got started doing this, where you see some of these reviews and some of these tasting notes, they get a little bit out of hand, but it's all fun and games at some point. But I agree with you 100% where I like to go out and say, this is my personal opinion. Whereas you guys, you also have that same knowledge, that same opinion, that same, ability to pick out those notes, but at the same time you offer such a different side of the bourbon world with your knowledge on history, your experience within the industry, both women's side and the men's side of things, as far as you on the tasting panel and you within women in whiskey, that it really, the two of you together bring something to the industry that I don't think a lot of other people have to offer. So one reason I wanted to get you guys involved in this myself, because you guys are awesome in that. And I'm going to ask you one last question. I got a couple more minutes here. I don't want to go too long. Where if anybody on chat, also either TikTok or on YouTube, have any questions for these two while I have them, I'll ask them one last question. They can finish up with their notes, and then we'll go from there. But we were just talking about store picks and getting to know somebody who knows your palate and everything like that. What's your idea on? So a lot of these single barrel store picks they're so up in the air and people hunt them so hard. Like, oh, I got a fine wine and good spirits store pick. And I'm like, well, who picked it? Who do you know? You know what I mean? Do you think they should be as sought after as they are? Because Buffalo Trace, now I have a bottle of fine wine and good spirits single barrel from Buffalo Trace, which is awesome because not everybody can get their hands on it. But at the same time, what if I don't have the same, like you said, palate as the person who's picking it? Should I just be hunting that because it's a store pick?
No, it's a great question, and it's a complex answer because it depends on the distillery. You know, somebody like Buffalo Trace, like it's cool to find a barrel pick of Buffalo Trace or of Weller or of something like that. But again, if it's too far different, then it's got the wrong label on it, right? So it's not going to be that much different on some of these larger distilleries than what the straight out of the barrel would be, or straight off the shelf would be rather. Whereas some smaller distilleries, like New Riff, right, like what Mac was talking about, of the ones that kind of embrace the differences between bottles. So when you find a store pick some of those, like it's cool because then you know somebody's vouched for it. You know somebody has gone through and found that specific bottle. There have been some single barrel bourbons that I have found from different brands that I just personally didn't like. Same label, same distillery, same recipe, but it's been a barrel pick, and I go, oh, that's really cool. That's really good, right? So it depends on the distillery, really.
And honestly, just like what he was saying a little bit ago, if your palate is different than the person picking it, it's not going to help. So if you can get to those stores and you, on the day that they're popping the bottles and sharing and letting you get an idea that, like, yeah, I think that would be a good investment as long as the flavor that you taste, if you can separate, this is a big deal, I should like it, and you just like, do I like this or not? Then you can decide, do I want to spend my $70
Yeah.
on this pick, or am I going to go find something else that I know I like, or that I'm going to try something new on.
Yep.
So yeah, it's that is tough, and that excitement over this barrel pick is amazing. That's also one of the things driving the secondary, and that's one of the things when you try, like just like what happened for me with New Riff, I tried that single barrel pick. So then I went back to my Kroger and I bought like 2 bottles because I thought they were going to be the same, and then they weren't. Still like them, but they weren't that thing that I fell for on that first pick. So
Yep.
Sense.
Gotcha. Well, listen, you guys have been awesome. I really appreciate you giving me some time tonight. This has been everybody in my chat. Great info, great live. This is awesome. You guys have so much information to give. So if you don't already, by the way, Basement Rickhouse, basement_Rickhouse. You've seen it pop up here on the live all day. Instagram, TikTok, make sure you follow them. They have great information like this all the time. They're one of my favorite follows because of the history, the knowledge that they bring on both sides of everything as far as tasting as well as the history, like I mentioned before. So thank you guys again. Thank you everybody on TikTok. And if you guys have anything else you'd like to say before we go, feel free.
Yeah, I would just say those of you that are on TikTok, because we're on YouTube, but we're not on YouTube. Go follow this guy because he's doing some really cool stuff and having really cool conversations. YouTube channel is blowing up and doing awesome. Instagram as well. So go check them out there. Even though we're ending here, we're gonna hang out for a few more minutes on TikTok. So don't feel like you have to jump off, and we'll hang out here a little bit longer. But thank you for having us. Again, drink what you like, how you like, with who you like. And our motto is, it's not what's in your glass, but it's who you're drinking with. So cheers. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I'm empty, but I'll cheers you. Or should I pour it up? I'll pour it up for you.
Yeah, come on, pour it up.
We'll go McKenna too, because that's one of my favorite bottles. I just got 2 more of myself, so this is definitely one of the tops on my list. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.